Hello everyone, and thank you for attending Savant Protection's webinar entitled, Where Did My Malware Problem Go? My name is Rennie Thibault, VP of Sales and Services at Savant, and I will be your host today. During today's session, we'll provide you with an overview of the cybersecurity threat landscape, why application whitelisting makes sense for credit unions, a review of what application whitelisting deployment would look like, and finally, we'll provide a brief overview and demo of Savant Enforcer. If you have any questions for us during the presentation, please use the chat feature, and we'll address all questions at the conclusion of the session. Also, the session is being recorded and will be posted on our website, which may reduce your need for note-taking. Joining me today is Walter Sirik, Savant Protection's CEO, who will cover the first two topics of our presentation. Walter?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Walter Sirik. I'm the CEO of Savant Protection. I'm going to briefly walk you through the threat landscape for business and then talk about why application whitelisting for credit unions. So first, let's talk about the threat landscape for business. Basically, we look at it as broken up into three categories. There's cybercrime, cyber espionage, and cyber sabotage. From a cyber crime standpoint, you're probably all fully aware of the usual risks that you face from cyber crime and fraud. But there's a new wave hitting businesses that has previously been reserved just for consumers, and that's ransomware. Currently, ransomware is wreaking havoc on small businesses. It's a type of malware that hijacks your machine and displays a ransom message. And usually this message could be from a law enforcement agency or some other trusted source, such as the IRS or your bank. And unless the ransom is paid, the machine and data will remain locked, often by encryption. One of the more popular ones out there that's in the press is CryptoLocker. And it's really been attacking a lot of consumers in the UK, whereby it demands a 2 Bitcoin ransom to receive a decryption code for the data. Now, while it's primarily been aimed at consumers in the past, it is spreading to small businesses. I'll give you some recent world examples. So locally here, we're in the Boston area. The Swansea, Massachusetts Police Department was hit by CryptoLocker, and despite being warned not to, they did pay the $750 fee in Bitcoin to get their data back. We are working with a few companies as well who've been recently hit. One was attacked via phishing email with a notice of a fax on the fax server to the accounting manager. She opened the attachment and subsequently ended up wiping out her machine and the accounting data that she had access to. On another example, a manufacturer who also has a distribution group received a USB stick from a state agency that contained pictures of an accident scene that involved one of their vehicles. Unfortunately, the distribution manager who used the USB stick put it into his machine that was infected with ransomware, and it destroyed their entire manufacturing database. Now, luckily for that company, they did back up their data, but it still took them 2 to 3 weeks to recover. On the cyber espionage front, while not a big concern for credit unions because it's mainly nation-state sponsored, it is highly destructive to business. I'll cite one example, that being Adobe. Their customer data was recently stolen and partially deleted, and their source code, which is their primary intellectual property, was compromised. On the cyber sabotage front, hackers are getting in and leaving persistent backdoors. In the past, they would simply wipe out your data, but knowing that most people back up their data, the new worrisome trend is that they're putting in malware that slowly corrupts your database, and over time, you won't even know that your data is basically disappearing. No entity is too large or too small to these attacks. Some data by Symantec for 2012 is that attacks against large employers, people who had employees over 2,500, doubled, but they tripled against organizations with 250 employees or less. And as you can see from the graph, 31% of all the attacks, targeted attacks, are against smaller entities. Now, one of the big attacks that we're seeing, especially against small business, is spear phishing. And we're calling it spear phishing 2.0. Basically, phishing 1.0 was targeted towards consumers with attachments with well-known malware variants that looked like they were emails coming from their banks or other trusted institutions. The antivirus products have been able to identify those signatures associated with that malware and provide updates to protect against those attacks. Now what we're seeing with phishing 2.0 is these campaigns are targeting your employees that have access to your most sensitive information. And the cyber criminal's goal is to plant malware on your employee's computer. Their intent is to carry out malicious exploits. This can be achieved through the capture of keystrokes, searching and exfiltrating data locally on their machine, or mining your company network while using your employees' credentials. Phishing 2.0 has been able to evade antivirus and even fool security-savvy internet users. One of the reasons they are so successful is they specialize these phishing messages by harvesting personal data from social network sources about your employees. And they also compromise legitimate websites and create water holes to attract victims. Now, these water holes, or this technique called water holing, is where attackers compromise a website that is known to attract people from a particular industry or company or geography, and they set up drive-by downloads. The attack vectors are varied and frequent, as you can see here by a study done of a benchmark 60 companies over just a 4-week period. And what this basically shows us is that 100% of the companies were attacked by viruses, worms, and Trojans. Now, these are what we would call successful attacks. These are not things that were stopped at the perimeter. Of note, I'd like to just quickly note about malicious insiders and phishing and social engineering, where 42% of the companies experienced those. Negligent or malicious insiders, as you can see, are extremely costly, with an average of 65 days to resolve those attacks. Phishing and social engineering still being about 2 weeks or 14 days. So why application whitelisting for credit unions? Well, at the very highest level, your risk management goal should be to ensure the long-term viability of your enterprise. Protect your business assets and protect the member assets and personal data. But smaller organizations like credit unions are considered softer targets than larger banks. Now, you probably don't have to worry about nation-state espionage, but you certainly have to worry about cybercrime and also insiders. Because your insiders have direct access to your information assets, and we know that they are susceptible to social tactics such as phishing, water holing, and sharing USB sticks. There's also inherent risks in human factors. I mean, your business is basically people. So targets by the percent of breaches within the social attacks, 43% are your regular employees. Tellers, cashiers have been about 33%. And most of the malware has keyloggers, they have external data sends, they are leaving backdoors, and they're also disabling and interfering with your security controls. So there is a big antivirus gap. If antivirus worked, we wouldn't be talking today. Antivirus, the only way it works is they have to know the signature of the attack to stop it. They also have to continuously update, and that requires a lot of high bandwidth. Cyber criminals today have developed kits that create hundreds or thousands of malware files with just enough variation so they can't be updated easily with standard signatures. And the criminals have also become more sophisticated, using encryption or sometimes double encryption to prevent AV from scanning attachments. So why whitelisting? Basically, there's a compelling customer value proposition. One is we close the gap that antivirus leaves behind. We stop all unknown malware and zero-day attacks. We're going to protect your assets from insiders. We're going to enforce your policies. We're going to prevent users from making unauthorized changes. We're going to prevent them from taking data and putting them on USB sticks or burning them to CD and taking them out of your organization. We're going to lower your IT security management costs because we're going to limit the need for system rebuilds. Also, whitelisting supports a broad set of IT requirements from knowledge and production workers. So knowledge workers are going to need to still download things. You can certainly allow them to do that. Production workers, maybe not so much, and you can put them more in a lockdown state. And compared to antivirus, we have a very low impact on your endpoint resources. So before I end my section and turn it over to Rennie to talk about deploying whitelisting, I'd like to just go quickly about a few customer use cases. We have Credit Union A. These are real customers. 200 endpoints. They're using Savant protection and 100% lockdown. They're using Sophos endpoint firewall, and they're using an event tracker. Their purpose for using the event tracker is they wanted to know real time where they were being attacked from, even though Savant was stopping all those attacks. So their security viewpoint is that they're looking at security and efficiency over user experience. They like the simplicity of red light, green light from lockdown mode. They also really like the ability to prove to auditors that data is not being stolen via CDs, USB sticks, by malicious or negligent insiders. And a few quotes is that you sleep much better at night knowing that Savant is your last line of defense. Now, Credit Union B is smaller, 50 endpoints. They have what's called a hosted solution, and Rennie will talk about that as well. They're using Savant protection in about 80% in lockdown, and then they're also using Microsoft Security Essentials. Their viewpoint is that security is a top priority. They only have their issue with whitelisting, which they like, is that it forces users to open a dialogue about why they need to load software. Users can't just go ahead and freely load different types of software or bring in software. New machines, very simple for them. They load Savant, they connect it to the server, and they start running in lockdown. We asked him how he came about to choosing Savant, and basically he asked himself the question, what can I do to never have a problem? He had previously used Norton's, and he continued to have malware problems, and his users were complaining about slow processing. So with that, basically I just have to say that the threat landscape is broad. Things are not getting any better. The cyber criminals are getting more creative. And with that, I'll turn that over to Rennie, who's going to talk about deploying whitelisting.
Thank you, Walter. So I think some of the questions that warrant answers with regard to deploying application whitelisting would be, what's the process, what do I get, and how long will it take before I begin to see benefits? And we'll just, over the course of the next few slides, cover that for you. So it's essentially a four-step process to discover what's on the endpoints, to determine what should be trusted, to then move the machines into a secured state, and then finally to collect log information, not because anything needs to be done on a real-time basis, but because, as Walter pointed out earlier, from an auditor standpoint, it is very, very useful and helpful and important to be able to monitor and record all of the activity, independent of whether something's been allowed or denied. So in the very first phase of discovery, the application whitelisting software is installed on the workstations and servers. A scan is performed to identify a complete inventory of all of the executables on the endpoint, and an inventory is created for each endpoint so that as an IT manager you can go and look at things like, well, if BitTorrent is installed, it certainly should be, because that violates all kinds of things and could create all kinds of problems. So knowing what's on the endpoint is important. And so here, as an example, is the kind of detail that you might expect to find as a result of the initial installation of whitelisting, a listing of the various different top-level applications that are on that endpoint, and if you've got the right supplier, you have the ability to drill down and look at all of the underlying individual executables, not just the top-level stuff, but all the DLLs and SYS files in addition to the .exes and so on. The next step is to establish what will be trusted. And so that's the creation of a whitelist on each endpoint, as well as defining the list of trusted updater agents. And an example of a trusted updater agent would be something like Windows Update, patches from Adobe, and so on. And once those updaters have been identified, what happens in the whitelisting environment is that filter sets are applied, which then define who the trusted updaters are and how they handle the trusted updating. So here you see an example of Altiris Deployment Server being a trusted source of change in this particular customer environment. You also want to be able to trust other applications running in an environment, like your antivirus. If you have a patching solution, etc., you may need to integrate with a logging system and so on. The next step is to move the endpoints into a secured mode, and that can come in one or two different flavors. A fully locked down device that might be used by a teller would be a deny by default the running of anything that's not on the list. A different secure mode might be protected mode for more senior members of the staff, like the VP of Marketing, for example, who might have a requirement to, on their own, install new software. And so we'd want to provide them with all the same protection that someone gets in lockdown, while still giving them the flexibility to bring in new applications that they may require to do their job. So an example of a user in lockdown mode would have all privileges denied. Executables cannot be written to the hard drive of that machine regardless of the source. That machine cannot add, modify, or delete software, and all privileges are denied. From a logging standpoint, you'd want to keep track of any attempts to copy, add, modify, or delete any executables on that machine. And as we mentioned earlier, one of the side benefits of a whitelisting solution is commonly the ability to control external storage devices, which can be configured for no access, read-only, or both read and write. So this can provide a way to prevent incoming data files, leaving executables aside, or prevent outgoing data files from moving on or off of the machine. In a different type of use case, in this one, an authorized user, which could be an IT admin or a more senior person in the organization, they would have access to more functionality. They should have a simple login via Windows. They would have the ability to make all changes locally, as well as from a central management console, and those actions would include the ability to install new applications or to apply patches or updates, etc. In any event, all activity on an endpoint should be logged. And those logs should be stored locally and can be accessed by an authorized user. Those logs should also be available centrally or to third-party systems. But in any event, whenever a system is being administered, it's critical that the protection never be interrupted when local administration is being undertaken. Lastly, in the deployment of application whitelisting, you begin to see the benefit of the endpoint data collected via the logs, and so that could include anything from someone tried to write to or read from a USB stick, to all executable attempts to install or whenever the whitelisting system would deny or allow an update or allow a change, etc. And so those logs, as we mentioned earlier, should be maintained locally, should be available centrally, and the whitelisting solution should integrate seamlessly with the rest of your security environment. So if you have an existing logging solution that's based on syslog, if you've got a security information event management system, the logging from the whitelisting system should be allowed to go to that consolidated an existing method of maintaining logs in your organization. So here's the 2-minute advertisement for Savant Enforcer specifically. What we're focused on is addressing the gap in existing security, where there's IDS, IPS, there's firewalls, there's antivirus, there's anti-spam. There are multiple layers of security typically deployed in your credit union. However, there's still a gap, and the gap is about unknown malware and insider attacks or targeted attacks based on social engineering. And so whitelisting, and Savant in particular, is a game changer in this regard because we can close that gap by stopping targeted attacks, zero-day attacks, insider mistakes or attacks that other layers of security simply cannot stop. Savant Enforcer is a fully downloadable and a full-featured client. It's easy to deploy, provides immediate security. It combines security with trusted change options, which is critical because you've got to have Windows Update, you've got to have patches for these applications, and you need the latest version of it so that you get all the productivity you're looking for. And lastly, Savant Enforcer can reduce your support costs because malware problems will go away, and that means you don't have to spend IT admin time trying to clean up machines or run malware bytes on machines or re-image machines in order to get them back to a protected state and functional state. What's unique about Savant Enforcer is that we use a patented local whitelist on each endpoint. And the advantage to that approach is that there cannot be any propagation of malware from one device to another because we use this unique patented encrypted whitelist on each endpoint. When Savant Enforcer is installed, it automatically creates the whitelist and then maintains that implicit whitelist on its endpoint. Only executables on the list will run, and it's not top-level stuff only. In the Savant environment, we're going to whitelist every SYS, DLL, .exe executable file on the machine, which on a typical Windows 7 machine can run to 40,000+ individual executables that are protected, and they're protected uniquely on each endpoint. We don't require a central whitelist, which means we can operate disconnected. There's no requirement for ingoing or outgoing communications, and it's a compartmentalized solution with unique keys to prevent propagation. The Savant Enforcer solution is easy to deploy and use in either existing environments or part of an image for new systems. The installation into an existing environment is silent, does not require a reboot, so that your employees can remain operational. And as previously stated, all relevant activity is logged, whether it's an allow or deny, along with contextual data. So if an install was allowed, you can request a reason for why they were installing that new software. And lastly, we have extensive legacy support all the way back to Windows 2000 on workstations and Windows Server 2003. So in conclusion, the functionality of whitelisting is to intervene whenever an executable is presented to the CPU and to determine whether or not there is a valid encrypted key for that executable. In the case of Word being presented here, there's a key for it, so we let it run. Anything that shows up that's not on the list, it's unapproved, it's unauthorized, it's unknown malware, is going to automatically be denied.
Savant Enforcer protects workstations and servers from unknown malware, targeted and zero-day attacks, as well as unintended changes to endpoints. In the following demonstration, the Savant Enforcer client is configured as an unauthorized user, sometimes referred to as a hardened machine, where all user privileges are denied, and the Savant Enforcer mode is set to lockdown. The Savant Enforcer icon in the system tray shows green, indicating that this system is in lockdown mode. By opening the Savant user interface, we can see that the top-level functions are grayed out. This client has no privileges whatsoever. The same is true for access to settings or actions, where all functions are unavailable with the exception of switch user. If an attempt is made to delete an executable file, Savant Enforcer will block that action. Please note that any pop-ups are generated by the operating system. An attempt to modify an executable will result in Savant Enforcer blocking that action as well. Attempts to run, download, or install a new executable from an internet connection will result in Savant Enforcer blocking the file from ever even landing on the machine, nor can it run since it's not on the local whitelist. Savant Enforcer also protects against executables being brought onto the machine or executed from an external storage device, for example, a USB drive. To demonstrate how the system can be administered locally, we will leverage the switch user function and log in as an IT admin. This will provide the IT admin with access to additional functionality, including the ability to install a new application. A privileged user benefits from the same protections against unknown or targeted malware as an unauthorized user. However, they can be granted access to some or all of the administrative functions of Savant Enforcer. In this example, by switching user, the IT admin has access to the complete set of functionality. To install new software, the IT admin would first switch from lockdown to protected mode. Thereby allowing a new MSI or EXE to be brought onto the system. Here, Skype click-to-call was brought onto the system for demonstration purposes. The admin chooses install and then browses to the desired file, in this case, Skype click-to-call, located on the desktop. If required, the IT admin can enter a reason for this installation for logging purposes. Savant Enforcer will then automatically complete the installation and update the local whitelist. When the IT admin logs off of the system, the user profile of unauthorized user is automatically restored by default, and as you can see here, once again, all privileges are denied.